All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Paul Santamar. I'm Director of Lending and Risk Products at Data. Today's session is, of course, on SBA franchise lending and eligibility. A little bit of a background on Data for folks who might not know everything that we do. Data is the leading research and information company that covers the franchise industry. And we have three main client groups. One of those client groups are lenders. So many of the folks are on the call today. For lenders, we do underwriting of franchise brands, or a report called a fund report, which is very much like a FICO score for a franchise brand. We also do business development for lenders. Franchisors, the brands themselves, are another client group. We engage with them primarily through a website called Franchise Registry, which we're going to do a screen share of on today. But we also do research like competitive benchmarking, compensation studies, and things of that like for the franchisor group. And we also work with suppliers. That's our third client group. And that could be anyone that's selling into those two groups, or even private equity firms. We're the research arm of the International Franchise Association. So you may have seen our yearly economic outlook in franchising. We also do several longitudinal studies around employment and inflation. And so we have this really unique position in the industry where we get a lot of information from these three groups and sort of sit in the middle of this franchise lending activity. So a little bit of a background on Data and sort of where we're coming from into this issue. Why are we here today? Of course, we're here to talk about eligibility, and I just want to run down the agenda for today. We're going to start with the current state of eligibility, sort of costly and chaotic. What are we experiencing today? What are the challenges? How are we addressing that? And more specifically, what is Data doing to help lenders in this situation? We're going to talk about a document called an eligibility certification. We're going to really get into that and what it does, what it means, how to get it. We're going to talk about how to get one for your deal. We're also going to take a live look at Franchise Registry, which is the website that I just mentioned, which is going to be the place where you're going to go to actually download all these documents and handle the eligibility situation going forward. And then we're going to finish up with some topical issues. We're going to do an update from GLQC. We were just at the conference about 2 weeks ago, maybe now, and there was some interesting topics on franchising we want to touch on there. I've got a couple of slides on sort of the history lesson of eligibility. How did we get to where we are today, and sort of the evolution of the process, which I thought might be important to just sort of keep in our minds. Then I want to go through a couple of bullet points on a franchise lending market update, what I'm seeing in the universe, and then we'll finish with how lenders are evaluating franchise performance today. We do have some time built in for questions at the end, but if you guys have some questions, we'll be monitoring the chat. Maybe if there's something sort of topical and important, we can stop and address that when it comes up. So what's our current state in terms of franchise eligibility? Our headline here is costly and chaotic. What are lenders experiencing today? SBA took the franchise directory offline in May of 2023. So that's almost 1 year ago now. So last May 2023, SBA took their franchise directory offline. And this was around a major change to the SOP, primarily around this idea of affiliation. SBA removed the affiliation concern as an eligibility issue for lenders. And that can be very simply thought of as elements of control. SBA was really concerned about franchise agreements having excessive control over the franchisees and by association your borrowers, and that those borrowers were no longer operating as a small business, that the franchise was having excessive control, and that those borrowers were essentially acting as agents of the franchisor. And that was a major, major issue for SBA. So they removed that affiliation issue as an eligibility concern with respect to franchising, but they left in other eligibility concerns, such as business model eligibility, discrimination, and other issues. Now, SBA was thinking that they were going to simplify this process by removing affiliation, and in their defense, a lot of the issues that were found in eligibility had to do with affiliation. But at the same time, SBA was also reviewing for all these other eligibility concerns, again, like business model eligibility, discrimination, and others. So in thinking that they were going to simplify this process, in fact, what they did was push back the burden of determining eligibility back onto the lender. And what we've seen so far is that lenders are generally uncomfortable determining franchise eligibility and really had relied on the SBA and the directory for the full spectrum of eligibility, not just affiliation. This has become a burden for banks that wasn't anticipated when this move was made. Initially, so when this change happened in May of 2023, initially most banks continued to lend to brands that they had a prior relationship with and were on the directory prior to its removal. The thinking there being that banks had relationships with brands, they were approved on the directory, they had their current agreement for 2023, no changes had been made to that agreement, and many banks were comfortable to continue on. Now in 2024, what we're seeing is that many franchisors are rewriting their franchise agreements for this year, and by extension, their franchise disclosure documents, And so lenders and sort of the community in general have less certainty as to the content of those agreements and any potential changes that might be happening and what their effects on eligibility have been. We've spoke to a lot of lenders about this, and their eligibility concerns are sort of all over the map. Some of them are concerned about certain provisions, others are concerned about others. There's really no unified set of eligibility issues that were determined by any of the specific lenders that we talked to. Everyone sort of had different concerns. And so this general uncertainty really slowed down the process, and in some cases, in some institutions, has necessitated some pretty costly and lengthy legal reviews of franchise agreements for every single loan that we've done. So it's created a lot of issue in the lending process, specifically in the franchise space. What are we doing to help this issue? And what are we going to be talking about primarily on this call? We have created a franchise eligibility certification, which I'm going to give you an example of. We're going to take a look at this on the call, an eligibility certification that is very much a kitchen sink document that's covering all these non-affiliation issues that were found by SBA. So we knew the affiliation isn't a concern, but there were major non-affiliation issues that were still a concern for SBA. Our document covers 26 of these specific issues that were commonly found by SBA during the reviews of eligibility. And we created this from all the past eligibility reviews that Fran Data was involved in. We'll learn a little bit more about that in the history section, and all the eligibility notes from SBA that were listed on the SBA franchise directory. Well, sort of the question to the group is, is your bank evaluating against all of these issues? How comfortable do you guys feel doing that? And how long might that take you per deal to actually go through and look at all of these specific provisions that we brought up? What is the process? How does this actually work? What are we doing with this? The franchisor is signing a certification, again, outlining all these elements, these 26 elements that SBA has found, non-affiliation issues. They're going to sign a certification that's going to attest that the current agreement that they're using, their agreement for the current year, does not have any language or provisions in it that would make it ineligible for SBA. Fran Data is assisting in this process, and we'll talk about how we go out to franchisors and get that. But we're going to make those certifications available for lenders on franchise registry. And we're going to continue to update these as new agreements are brought out by franchisors. So we're anticipating updated certifications for 2024 here in May. Most of the new agreements and FDDs and things that come from franchisors typically come around this time, end of March, April, and May is when we see the new documentation. So that's when we expect to see updated certifications on franchise registry. I thought this would be a good point in the presentation to take a look at sample certification so you guys can see exactly what's happening in this and what franchisors are signing and attesting to. Certification document, as we talked about, is specific to the year of the agreement that the franchisor is signing. And what have we done in the beginning of the document? We very clearly outlined for the franchisor what is going on, what are they certifying to, and where this information is going to be used. Specifically, the franchise is certifying that all the statements and information in the certification are true, that the brand understands and acknowledges that SBA and the lenders are going to rely on the certification, and the franchisor further acknowledges that submission of false information to the SBA or withholding material information can result in criminal prosecution. So we put some teeth into this document so the franchisor knows where we're playing. And then we go into these eligibility provisions that we talked about here, and the franchisor is signing and certifying to these. So these are general eligibility provisions, filing liens against real estate collateral, non-disturbance and atonement language. We have business model eligibility covered in here. And we have other eligibility issues, things like lobbying, passive business, brand is not engaged in CBD activity or marijuana. CBD brands would have to be 5% of their total revenue, which is something that we worked out and had worked with Vitamin Shop, which is a franchise brand, and a list of other SBA rules. I have an example of a signed agreement here, so you can see sort of where that has gone and evolved. This is the agreement that was signed by Sport Clips. They did this at the end of last year. This is their 2023 agreement. You can see sort of the form of this. They're filling this out. And at the bottom of this document, it's been signed by their chief financial officer, Franklin Bird. And this is the document that's going to be listed for you on a franchise registry. So we get this signed, it's listed on the website. And for all the deals that we have, all we need to do is go to the site and make sure that we have the correct certification for the year of the agreement that we're doing. And we're going out to franchisors to make sure that they have this on, and we're going to talk about that process as we go through the rest of the presentation. How do we get a certification for our deal? Always, always, always check franchise registry first and as early as possible in the deal cycle. Understand, has this brand done a certification? Have they listed it on the franchise registry? Everyone on the call today can get a login for franchise registry. We're going to talk about that. But if you're an SBA lender, if you're a lender here, you can all get a free tier login to participate in this certification process. If the brand does not have a certification, reach out to us immediately. And again, as early as possible, because we're engaging, we're going to be doing hand-to-hand combat here with these franchisors. We will reach out to the franchisor and get the certification signed and post it on franchise registry for you. I want everyone on the call to think about this idea of a community of interest, and that certifications that other lenders get will be available for you and vice versa. We have over 200 franchisors that have already signed the certification. There's over 2,000 active franchise brands right now in the US, and maybe about 900 or 1,000 of those brands have our fund reporting score. So those are sort of the brands that are really doing a lot of activity in SBA. But of a universe of about 2,000 brands, we have a lot more to go, and we're working with each one of these to get them signed. So if you have a brand that doesn't have a deal, come to us. We're going to go out and get that for you. There's no cost to a lender to get a certification signed or to download one from franchise registry. So again, community of interest. Your benefit is the benefit of someone else, and everything that they do, you're going to have access to on franchise registry. We expect that this list is going to grow very rapidly over the next weeks and months, and that we should have a very large number of franchisors that have signed that certification. And again, we're going out to educating lenders as well as franchisors as to the importance of this, and that they need to participate in this process. Where do I get the certification? That's going to be on franchise registry, and we are going to do a screen share for that in a bit. It's located on the underwriting tab. So if you folks already have access to franchise registry sort of on the call, you can start going ahead and searching in. You can go and search for sport clips. You're going to find the certification on the underwriting tab. As I said before, everyone on the call can get a login for the site. If you don't have a login, go ahead and reach out. We're going to do that screen share here. And I think the next slide, I'm going to show you exactly how franchise registry works. But everyone here on the call can get a login for our website. I'm going to take you through very quickly on the site. I'm going to show you how to log in, how to search for a brand, what the brand homepage is, where you land after you've searched for a concept. We're going to focus on the general tab with information, and on the underwriting tab, we're going to show you how to access the eligibility certification here. All right, so what you're seeing here is the landing page, the homepage for franchise registry at franchiseregistry.com. And this is a lender-only site. So there's information here from franchisors that are presented for lenders, but this is only for lenders. So franchisees don't get access, the general public doesn't get access. These are only for lenders. Only lender can get an access, or a login for franchise registry. You go ahead and put in your login, you log in, you're going to be deposited on the homepage for a brand. It's pretty straightforward in terms of searching for information. We have the name of a brand. We can just search tropical for tropical smoothie, as in the slide example. We just look at sport clips. So let's take a look. Let's just search for sport, see what we get. Not surprising, is the franchise space. We get a lot of results when we look for sport, but we're going to focus on sport clips today. And when we find our brand, we click into it, we're going to land on the general tab for this concept. And this is where some initial information that we get from the franchisor is provided, specifically the contact information for the brand. Now, this is really, really important and valuable just sort of in general, but the franchisor, so as I said before, they're paying us a yearly fee. They're putting their documentation up here. We're creating their fund report. We'll share it with them, let them know where they're strong and where they're weak. But one of the first things they do is they provide contact information for key decision makers and actors at the brand level. And those are in 3 different categories. Is a contact that you can reach out to for any performance or underwriting questions at the brand. What's in their FDD or not in their FDD? A certain borrower has projections of X, and is that within the realm of what we would expect for a new unit? All those types of underwriting questions, you want to go to the franchise financing. Franchise sales is our biz dev contact. So if there are any BDOs on the call that are looking to establish new direct relationship with brands, one of the great ways you can reach out to and find those executives is by reaching out to the franchise sales contact. Then the SBA contact is probably more relevant for a lot of the folks on this call. This is a contact for an individual at the brand that's available to help with any SBA documentation or processing issues or questions. So that could be signed franchise agreement prior to first disbursement of funds, certificate issues, anything like this that we're talking about, eligibility questions, anything like that has to do with the SBA process. You would reach out to the SBA contact at the brand. So that's what you'll find on the general tab. Now you can see here this ability to download a fund report. This is for our institutional subscribers. So I'm showing you our institutional login. The free tier access will not have access to the fund reports, but you're seeing what an institutional subscriber would see when they log in on franchise registry. Underwriting tab has the meat of the information that we've talked about before so far today, and that's where you're going to find the eligibility certification. But moreover, the underwriting tab has the bulk of the documentation needed to look at franchise performance. Again, if you're a subscriber, you're able to download the fund report. Other two documents here are available for all lenders who have a login. The first is the franchise disclosure document. So the FDD for every brand that's an FRM member, you're going to be able to access here on franchise registry. So think about maybe a borrower has asked about a potential deal with a franchise, or you've heard about a brand and you want to see a little bit more. We don't have to ask the borrower for the FDD or the franchisor. We can get it right here from franchise registry. Just go ahead and download that. The other item that you're seeing there is a bank credit report. Now, that is an independent risk analysis of performance that's done by franchisors, made available to lenders. When you click that button that says request anywhere in franchise registry, you'll get an email from us within 24 hours. We'll reach out to the franchisor, see if they can do that kind of a report for you. But moreover, what we're talking about on this call is the eligibility certification. I want you to look for that in the other documents section. So when you get an underwriting tab, you want to come down to other documents and we want to confirm, okay, do we have an eligibility certification? If we do, we're just going to go ahead and download that. And again, we're seeing the same document that I just showed you from Sport Clips. So we want to look and see, do they have a certification? If they don't, call Frame Data immediately. We're reaching out, we'll get the document, we'll get it on there. If they have a 2023, but they haven't done the 2024, and again, we're in April, we're in May, we're a little bit further along, that's a sort of trigger to say, hey, wait a minute, we got to have the more current certificate. Let's make sure that the brand is either in process or again, Frame Data can reach out. But that's where I want you guys to focus. Get on franchise registry, look at the underwriting tab, get down to the eligibility certification, confirm if it's there, and if it's not, then reach out to us so that we can go ahead and get that for you. Okay. Before we move on to this, any questions so far on what we've seen with eligibility, the documentation, franchise registry, anything of that nature? Ah, fantastic. Nanelle asked, how often will we update certification? Yes, Nanelle, we are updating it annually, and in line with when the franchisor puts out their new documentation, their agreements. Wanted to give you guys an update from the Georgia Lender Quality Circle, and more specifically with respect to franchising and some of the things that were discussed in the sessions. You know, SBA had some slides up about franchising, and in one of their open sessions, and then further in the breakout session, we're sort of floating a case where there was somehow some fraud in franchising. They wouldn't tell us what brand it was. We knew what brand it was. They wouldn't tell us, you know, what the concept was, sort of teased in a breakout session that we're going to talk about fraud and franchising. Everyone showed up. We didn't get to hear about the brand. And it was seemingly a very scary thing because they said that this was a passive business. What we knew about this situation was it, in fact, was not a franchise. It was a license operation, a license agreement. Unfortunately, it did spread a lot of fear about franchise lending, but this company itself was actually not a franchise. Why this is important here is that if the lender, and there was a bank out there that did a couple of loans to this concept, it turned out it was a passive business. The lender had relied on the certification in this case, the franchisor would not have been able to sign that certification because if you do a little research on this brand to their website, they basically had passive business, you know, plastered all over their site. So some of that language in there about passive business would not have been able to be signed by the franchisor. And in this case, if we looked at the certification, we would have helped this issue. So it was somewhat misleading, and you know, folks wanted to hear, you know, oh wow, what was the name of this brand that had all this fraud, and we didn't ultimately get that name. But it turned out to be a non-franchise concept. So these are the types of things that we are concerned about, and that the certification is designed to help lenders navigate when we talk about franchise lending, and especially some of the new concepts that are coming out that you guys are having to deal with. A couple more questions, and that was around cost. Yeah, so just two questions. Can lenders access the info without subscribing? Is there a fee to access the information? This is free. The act of getting your certification. So your login for franchise registry is a free tier login. The ability to download an FDD from a brand that has paid us to host their information, that is also free. And then again, everything that we're doing with the certification. Everything else, so fund reports and all the other work that we do with biz dev and lenders, that is a for pay product with our subscription group. So hopefully that answered some of those questions. I thought it would be, sort of useful to understand a little bit of the history on this. So we talked about where we are today and the removing of affiliation. But I think it's important to understand what our role has been in this in the past and how this has evolved from before the SBA directory, the time when we had the directory, over to today. So sort of, in the beginning, in the beginning to about 2017 was sort of the era of FRAN data, franchise registry, and pre what we have today with the SBA directory. And this is part and parcel of a lot of the confusion that has been out there in the lending world about, well, is franchise registry and franchise directory, are they the same? I heard that the SBA directory is going away. Does that mean franchise registry is going away? Are you guys tied together? For once and for all, we are completely separate. Franchise registry has always been owned by FRAN data. It's always been a place that SBA franchise lenders have come for information and guidance, and it will continue to be that in the future. The big concern, or really the distinction there, was that before the SBA directory was stood up, FRAN data was doing a majority of the eligibility reviews on behalf of the SBA. SBA would review a new agreement when it came in, but any of the ongoing reviews for changes and year-over-year stuff with FDDs, FRAN data would handle that. And again, as we talked about before, the primary concern then was affiliation, was elements of control between the franchisor and the franchisee. Folks that have been around a bit remember franchise registry and may remember a process that included getting a certificate of franchise documents and then a negotiated addendum, essentially a certificate saying that SBA had reviewed all of our agreements, and then a negotiated addendum that was applicable to a brand and that would solve all the SBA issues that had been found. Lenders came to our franchise registry to rely on the certification. So it's very similar today to a process that we were all doing prior to 2017 and the standing up of the SBA directory. The second era, sort of the era of SBA directory, was from 2017 to last May 2023. In October 2017, SBA created the franchise directory. And with that, a standard addendum form, that form 2462, which you guys on the call I know you're familiar with, was created with that. Basically, what was said at the time was like, hey, most of the elements of affiliation control that we're reviewing were basically the same for many brands, right? The addendum that everyone was signing had basically the same provisions in it. There were 4 or 5 elements that really covered a lot of what SBA was looking at when we talked about affiliation. So they created that standard addendum form, and that was indicated on the directory. Can we use the standard addendum form or not? Some brands still use that negotiated document because they had specific issues with eligibility, but there was no certificate was required. So all you have to do is just go to the SBA directory to verify eligibility and then see, do we need form 2462 or do we need another addendum? And as I said before, FRAN data and franchise registry continue to operate. We continue to work with lenders, we continue to work with franchisors and create fund reports, do underwriting and biz dev for lenders. But through this period, eligibility was taken over by the SBA directory. Now we flash forward to today, where they removed that directory in May 2023. And at the same time, that's these elements of affiliation that were taken out of the SOP. So SBA was saying, hey, wait a minute, we just simplified this entire process. You don't have to worry about affiliation anymore. You just have to worry about the other things. So the lenders are saying, wait a minute, we don't know how to do the other things. We don't know about all the other eligibility issues. We've been relying on you for the last 6 years. So that's where we've come from and why we're in the situation we are today, with a lot of the confusion and sort of the slowdowns that we're seeing in some of the SBA lending today. A couple more questions. Great question from Jamila. Is there an updated list of all brands that have signed the certification? Yes, there is. We can send that out to you guys. We update that sort of on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis. When we get more information and more of these certifications for brands, we'll update that list so we can certainly distribute that to you guys after the call if you want to see a hard list of brands that are already on there. As I promised, I want to give you guys just a bit of an update on the franchise lending market in a couple bullet points. What am I seeing? What are we seeing in the space? What can you guys expect in a couple of different areas? First thing I want to talk about are franchise brands that are exploring new lending partners. I talk a lot to different banks and sort of they ask me like, hey, wait a minute, I want to get into franchising, but I'm assuming all the best deals are taken already, right? Like all these big brands already have partners and I'm already frozen out of the market. The reality is that Franchise brands are always exploring new partners, but even more so in the current environment. We have banks that are pulling back from traditional franchise relationships. We have new institutions that have started to lend into the franchise space. And brands have lots of different needs across lots of different uses of capital. So they have needs for startups, they have needs for refreshes and remodels, they have needs for resales, they have needs in different parts of the country. And so brands have a diverse spectrum of needs. And what we saw in 2020 and 2021, and even some in 2022, were that not all these relationships between franchisor and lender were fully taken care of, were fully dealt with the needs that they had during PPP. And because of that, a lot of brands are expanding and looking for new partners. So if you're a new bank and you're looking to explore franchise lending, there is a lot of opportunity for you guys out there. The second element I've seen is that the profile of the franchisee borrower has changed a lot. We're seeing less and less new startups. We're also seeing, fewer banks that are willing to do those startups. And we're seeing a lot more sort of M&A activity, both on the franchisor level, so brands being purchased by private equity, but also on the franchisee level. So think about, established franchisees within a system purchasing existing units from other operators that maybe are underperforming. A 10-unit operator goes and gobbles up a couple of small guys. That kind of activity we're seeing in the system. We're also seeing private equity firms get into franchising on the franchisee level. So PE firms are going in and buying out large multi-unit operators, and maybe not so much exploring on the system level to purchase, but exploring purchasing large swaths of a system as franchisees and operating that way. So we've seen a lot of change in what the typical franchisee borrower actually looks like. As I sort of hinted at before, and kind of already went through, new banks are exploring franchise lending, right? And so, as I said, bigger players are exiting or maybe paring back their portfolio a bit. New shops are opening, so we're seeing folks that maybe had lead roles at other institutions being hired as director of SBA and are being hired to spin up new SBA groups and franchise lending verticals, leveraging their existing experience. And we're seeing that on all different size ranges, right? So we're seeing, banks that are maybe $1-2 billion banks all the way up to large, hulking institutions. They're starting to understand there's a big opportunity here in the SBA franchise lending space. So there's a lot of new banks out there. And the final point is that small deals remain underserved. So if you're a lender that has the ability to do small loans, 150K and under, obviously 350K and under. We know that the small loan cap is now 500K. A lot of franchisors sort of chuckle when I tell them, look, a 500K loan's a small loan now. And there are a lot of franchises that have an initial investment size between that 300 and 500K. So if you can handle small deals, especially in your footprint, if you're an institution that's thinking, oh, well, we're only in a couple states, this isn't really for us. Well, I would challenge that perception, because there are a lot of brands that manage those relationships and, again, have needs for different uses of capital, different investment sizes at different locations and regions of the country. So if you can do small deals, there's a lot of opportunity for you guys out there in the franchise market. Another question. If a brand is not verified franchise registry member, will certification not be available? That is correct. So the brand needs to be an FRM member, which very simply means we're engaging with them. We understand who they are. They're giving us their FDD. They're putting contact information. And then again, we create their fund report and we share it with them. It's a very minimal spend for a franchisor. It's under $1,000 for them to cover their entire system. Or typically, if you're going to get a legal review of a document, you might spend that and more just for a single loan. So there's a lot of value and benefit for the franchisor to engage with us, both in the certification and the franchise registry membership. Wanted to finish by just touching on how lenders are evaluating franchise performance. I want to talk about the difference between an emerging versus mature brand, just sort of set up how we look at that. I want to take a quick look at a fund report. I'm not going to go through the entire report, but I want to take a couple of thumbnails so you guys can get a sense of sort of what's in that, and then a couple of slides on emerging brands. What does that mean, and how do we evaluate them? So when we talk about the difference between an emerging or a mature brand, it has to do with size and tenure, right? So we define an emerging brand as a franchise that has less than 50 franchise units operating in the United States and less than 5 years worth of franchising activity, which sort of the shorthand of that is to say less than 5 years worth of franchise disclosure documents that we have collected. If a brand is actively selling new units, they have to have a current franchise disclosure document. So that's what we're looking for. 5 years of FDDs, 50 franchise units for an emerging brand. We only do the fund report, that scored report on an emerging brand. The major reason why, and a couple of the other slides I'm going to show you will sort of fill this out a bit, but we need to see sufficient seasoning in the units of a brand before we evaluate them against the fund report methodology. What we've seen in the slides will show you this is that if an emerging brand is going to lose units, they're typically going to lose it in year 4, year 5, and year 6, right? It sort of takes a couple of years for those initial units to fail. So it's very rare that you're going to see a new brand just starts opening units and they're going to start failing in year 2 and year 3. So again, we need to see a certain seasoning before we evaluate them against a scored methodology. But we do a report for an emerging brand called a pre-fund report, which looks at a lot of the same data points in the report, but often is hampered by emerging brands, of course, not having the historical performance, but in some cases, they may not even disclose the unit level financials and the franchisor economics. And that can also hold back any kind of evaluation of an emerging brand. So, sort of reflected in the last 2 points, mature brands, generally more historical performance and data available, but they are more likely to have established relationships. Not all of them. There's a lot of opportunity out there. But emerging brands have a lot less data available, but they're the ones that are going to be banging down your door looking for lender partners to drive growth. They want to go. We want to open 20, we want to open 50 units this year. So you're going to see a lot more sort of enthusiasm and exuberance there from your emerging brand franchisors and franchisees that are getting into new emerging concepts. Promise a live look at a fund report. And the folks on the call that have seen me go through this before know I can talk for about 15 minutes on a fund report. But I want to give you just sort of the very top level of what we're doing inside the document. The fund report is a scored report, a methodology, a standard methodology for evaluating franchise performance that looks at information in 2 levels. We look at the unit level performance, so what's happening with the units on the ground. We look at the franchisor level performance, so what's happening with the franchisor company. In this case, with Take 5, it's an entity called Take 5 Franchisor SPV LLC. And we look at both qualitative and quantitative measures, right? So we look at something like historical unit success, how are we actually performing? There's a quantitative measure. We also look at qualitative measures like franchisor-franchisee relationship. Do we have bankruptcies and litigations, and are we sort of suing our franchisees or vice versa? So the first 4 categories of the report deal with unit economics. So we look at historical unit success rate. Think about this sort of like an SBA loan loss or, looking at the performance of the brand over time. But this looks at all the units in the system. So not just SBA, not just conventional finance, everything that's entering or exiting the system. And we do an 8-year look back. So we're looking back through several disclosures to understand what the unit performance has been over time. The compounded rate here against all brands and franchising determines the total score in historical unit success. Other 3 categories deal with bottom line, top line revenue, bottom line profitability, and resale activity level of those units on the ground. So resale asks, how often are the units trading? Is that within a favorable band of activity? And then, metrics that you guys are familiar with are top line revenue and our bottom line profitability. We're first looking for transparency. How much information is provided by the franchisor? If there's nothing, if they don't provide any information, the brand gets a 0 in the category. Then we look at, okay, there is information. What percentage of the system did you give us? And we're going to rate that. And then once we've sort of waded through transparency, we're going to look at the actual performance, how we've been doing over the last 3 years. We're going to benchmark it against its peers in franchising. That's true for both the top line revenue and the bottom line profitability. From there, we go up to the franchisor level. I mentioned before franchisor-franchisee relationship. Recurring revenue self-sufficiency is one that I really like to mention a lot. That looks at the recurring revenue streams of a brand and asks, do we take in enough money from those recurring revenue streams to pay our ongoing expenses? Or do we have to open a bunch of new units to collect more royalties to then become solvent? This category and some of the other ones are also affected by transparency. You might notice that Take 5 has a 0 in this category. And the reason is that they're owned by driven brands. So when we go into their disclosure and their information, we get recurring revenue information and financials for driven brands, which is a large multi-brand organization, which is fantastic. but we don't get the see-through into the specific brand with Take Five. So even though this is a top performing brand, they do lose some points for transparency because they're bound up with driven brands. And then you can see on the franchisor level, our financial statement strength, system support, and expense commitment. What are we doing to support our franchisees? A, and then B, how much are we spending on it? Pretty straightforward there. Management experience and stability looks at the executives of the team and how long they've been with the franchise. Prospect screening looks at our minimum net worth and liquidity requirements, super important for lenders to sort of understand what's the strength of the borrower that we could expect when we work with this concept. And then the borrowers that we're seeing, are we actually maintaining those standards, or do we have some sort of slippage on the street from what our executives are saying versus maybe the recruitment team or the brokers are actually doing? And the final two categories are franchise agreement assessment and projected unit success. Franchise agreement assessment actually looks at the document itself and looks at anything that could be a credit concern on your package. So this isn't a performance issue. This is a language in the franchise agreement. And we're talking about things like sole sourcing requirements. Does my borrower get a protected territory? Liquidated damages is included in here. If my unit closes, the borrower is going to owe, 5 years worth of royalties uncollected to the franchisor. Anything like that's going to be in the franchise agreement assessment. And then our projected unit success is taking everything that we've seen from the brand and projecting forward, taking into account transparency, the overall performance, and the sector and industry as well. So if we're seeing any headwinds or tailwinds in the space, it's going to come up in the fund report there. So, we can go into a lot more detail with this, but I just wanted you guys to see what's sort of important for us when we evaluate a franchise brand and what are some of the other banks doing to evaluate performance. We've got a Q&A that's come up. John, nice to see you. John's asking what the annual demand for franchise financing is and what percentage that's funded through the SBA. I'd have to go look at that. I know we have that in our yearly economic outlook. It is in the billions. I don't want to start shouting out numbers that are going to be incorrect, but it is quite substantial, the total franchise universe for lending and the percentage of that's actually soaked up and handled by SBA financing. So it is a significant number. Promise you a couple slides on emerging brands to sort of help you understand, like, wait a minute, why don't we do fund reports on emerging brands? First thing to understand is that most emerging brands really function a lot like a true startup. They're started by a founder and their spouse, or a founder and a business partner, usually a 2-3 person team. And think of a concept that maybe had 1 or 2 company-owned units. You're a small business person, you're running your business, and you're thinking, gosh, like this concept's a home run, but I can't run 10 stores. I can't do 15 by myself. Wait a minute, let's franchise the concept. The problem tends to be is that the 2-person or the 3-person teams don't have the significant professional experience across all the different areas that are needed to actually operate a franchisor and a franchise going concern at the level that's needed. So you're going to have management, you might have sales or operations, but typically you're not going to have the long tail of professional experience that's needed to do it. Financing, training, marketing, you see it all down the line, IT and legal. Right? So that's about 86% of the universe. There's an exception there, and you sort of see that, and that's an experienced franchise company that's 14%. So some of our emerging brands are actually brands that are started by existing franchisors that have successful businesses, successful franchises that are starting up a new concept. So that would be an exception to this rule about emerging brands not having the experience and the tenure. We can find a new emerging brand that's backed by a large franchisor. That's something that we would take a second look at and say, hey, wait a minute, it's not really a true emerging brand. What are their ambitions? Now, there's an accompanying slide that goes with this that isn't in this presentation, but I'll just give you the summary of it. When we look at the franchise industry today, about 18% of the concepts are what we would call national or international brands, right? So in 35 or more states and throughout the world. Actually, half of the universe today of franchise brands are local concepts, are in 10 or fewer states. So that's, again, sort of more to the point of, small banks can have an impact. But with emerging brands, what's funny is that when we survey them, 72% of emerging franchisors plan to grow their brand into a national or international presence within the next 5 years, which is completely out of balance with what we see today. Again, like 18-19% of all franchise brands are national and international. So the takeaway is that early stage franchisors often have ambitions that are unrealistic, and lenders need to guard against that kind of thing. How are they performing? Big takeaway here. Fast growing emerging brands are the exception rather than the norm. I know that that's what gets the entrepreneur top 100 and we're fastest growing franchise. Growing 100 units a year and we're wonderful. But what we see is that is the exception, not the norm. They often have what we call digestion issues down the road. We haven't picked the right franchisee. We haven't picked the right location. We haven't proven our model, what have you. What we see in terms of the average is 1 to 2 units in the first year, then graduating to 3 to 5 to 8 to 10 units per year as we get up to that 4th and 5th year. That is generally what we see in franchising an emerging brand. We do not see fast growing brands that do 100 units a year as an emerging concept. And this sort of is a slide to tell us why we wait to that 5th year and sort of show you visually. I know it sort of made sense when we talked about before, but why do we wait to year 5? Because what we see is that the continuity rate is going to decline in the first 5 years as franchise openings increase. And they're going to level out in year 4 and year 5. So again, continuity rate starts at 99, 97, 96. Then it starts to level out in year 4 and year 5. So this is sort of a visual, again, of why we wait to that 5th year to do a fund report, to do a score that our lender subscribers are going to be relying on. That is everything that I wanted to get out to you guys today. I am going to be at the Mid-America Lender Conference next week. And if you'll indulge our marketing team with this fabulous sort of mashup here, I won't be holding a crocodile at the conference, but we're going to be at Malk next week. We're doing a breakout session. We've got a booth. We're at table 46. So if you guys are around, I'd love for you to ping me. We can set up a meeting. We can talk eligibility. We can talk about underwriting, business development, whatever's important to you guys. But we'll be at Malk next week. So we'd love to see you guys there. Let us know how we did today. Zoom is going to pop a survey for you at the end of the webinar. We'd love for you to fill it out. Tell us how we did, how we can help you in the future. If there's anything that you guys have additional questions about that we're not going to cover here in the next few minutes, love to hear from you. Love to hear the feedback and sort of what you guys are challenged with in the franchise lending space. We'll go ahead and open it up to questions as we come down the home stretch. Brad asked, will we send out the presentation? We will send out the presentation. I'm quite sure that we'll have a recording, as Melinda has recorded this. And we'll have that. So we'll have the slides, we'll have the recording. I am also available to everyone. So my contact information, I want to make sure you guys get that. My email, my telephone number, you guys can reach out directly to me and we'll certainly help with any issues that you guys have. How do you get a login for franchise registry? Go ahead and email to us you can email me, psantamar@frandata.com. If Melinda can type in the chat, I think the inbound general email is franchiseregistry@frandata.com or frandata. You can put that, Melinda, if you can just type that in the chat where they can inbound in. So just send us an email in. We'll get your contact information. We just need your full name, your title, your email, and your telephone number. And we'll go ahead and get you signed up and set up. So if you guys don't have a login again, please go ahead and get that done and we'll make sure that we have that for you by the end of the week. All right. Thank you guys again for attending. We really appreciate it. And please reach out to us at Frandata if you have any needs in the franchise space. Thanks so much.